Before you listen any further, let me ask you something that might sting a little. What if the reason people stop respecting you isn't because you're too kind, but because you never taught them where you end? What if the moment you think you're being understanding, flexible, and easy to love, something inside her quietly decides you're easy to ignore? And here's the uncomfortable identity attack no one prepares you for. If you don't set boundaries early, you're not seen as a good man. You're seen as a man who can be bent. Sit with that for a second, because by the end of this story, you may realize the danger wasn't her behavior at all, but what you allowed without realizing why. Most men don't lose relationships in dramatic explosions. They lose them slowly, in silence, through 1,000 tiny concessions that feel harmless in the moment. It starts with you telling yourself, it's not a big deal. You cancel one plan. You explain yourself one extra time. You ignore a tone that felt off because you didn't want conflict. And here's the painful part, every time you override your own discomfort to keep the peace, you train the other person how to treat you. The brain is terrifyingly efficient like that. It learns patterns fast. And somewhere between your patience and your silence, a quiet shift happens. She doesn't wake up one day wanting to walk all over you. She simply realizes she can. But why does that realization happen so early? And why don't most men notice the moment it begins? There's a psychological trap here that almost every man falls into, and it's rooted in fear. The fear of being misunderstood. The fear of being labeled too much. The fear that if you assert yourself, you'll lose her. So instead, you delay honesty. You postpone limits. You tell yourself you'll speak up later, when things are more secure. But the human mind doesn't work that way. Early interactions don't just build attraction. They set the rules of the game. The nervous system of the other person is subconsciously asking, what happens if I push here? And every time nothing happens, the line moves. What most men don't realize is that by the time they finally speak up, the relationship has already learned who holds the ground. But what if the real mistake isn't speaking up too late, but misunderstanding what boundaries actually are? Here's where the story takes a turn most people don't expect. Boundaries are not rules you impose on someone else. They're signals you send about how seriously you take yourself. And the brain, especially in close relationships, reads those signals constantly. Think about the men you instinctively respect. It's not because they explain themselves endlessly. It's because there's a quiet finality to their energy. They don't rush. They don't over-justify. They don't beg to be understood. And that creates a subtle psychological tension. One that makes people pay attention. When a man lacks that tension, when his availability has no edges, no cost, no weight, something crucial disappears. Desire needs friction. Respect needs limits. Without them, affection turns into convenience. But how exactly does that shift happen in real life, in moments so small you barely notice them? Picture this, a man who is always available, always agreeable, always responsive. At first, it feels comforting. Safe. Predictable. But the human brain doesn't bond deeply with what it can fully predict. It bonds with what it might lose. This isn't cruelty, it's wiring. When your time, energy, and emotional labor are always on tap, they stop being valued. Not consciously. Subconsciously. And here comes the emotional peak most men never see coming. The more you try to prove your worth by giving more, the more invisible that worth becomes. That's the bitter truth. Because value that isn't protected doesn't feel like value. It feels like background noise. And once you become background noise, raising your voice later only sounds like static. So where does a man draw the line without becoming cold, distant, or arrogant? This is where real boundaries are born, not from anger, not from fear, but from clarity. A man who knows his limits doesn't announce them dramatically. He lives them. He doesn't chase explanations when something feels off. He doesn't reward inconsistency with more effort. And when something crosses a line, he doesn't explode, he withdraws access. That's the part that shocks people. Because the strongest boundary isn't an argument. It's the calm removal of presence. The psychology behind this is simple but brutal. The brain only respects consequences it can feel. Words fade. Energy doesn't. When someone senses that certain behaviors reduce closeness, attention, or availability, the behavior either changes, or the relationship reveals its true nature. But here's the question that should make you pause. What if setting boundaries doesn't push the right woman away, but instead filters out the wrong dynamic before it costs you years? Most men discover this lesson too late. They wake up one day feeling strangely small in a relationship they invested everything into. They can't pinpoint when it happened, only that they're no longer consulted, no longer prioritized, no longer felt. And the cruel irony? They were there the whole time. Over-present. Over-giving. Over-accommodating. This is the moment of self-realization that hurts the most. Love without self-respect doesn't feel like love to the other person, it feels like permission. Permission to test. Permission to take. Permission to lead while you follow. And once that role is assigned, reversing it feels almost impossible. Unless, the boundaries were never about control at all, but about identity. Because at the deepest level, boundaries answer one silent question every relationship asks: who are you when it costs you something to be yourself? A man who can tolerate discomfort to protect his values sends a powerful psychological signal. He is not afraid of loss. And paradoxically, that's what makes him hard to lose. The moment you stop negotiating your self-worth, the entire emotional dynamic shifts. Not instantly. Not magically. But unmistakably. And here's the final curiosity I want to leave hanging in your mind. What would change in your relationships if the next time something felt wrong, you didn't explain, didn't argue, didn't chase, but simply chose yourself and watched what happened next? The moment you choose yourself, something subtle but powerful begins to happen beneath the surface, something most people never consciously notice, yet everyone feels. The emotional atmosphere changes. The air gets heavier. Not because you became colder, but because your presence now carries weight. And this is where many men panic, because silence feels dangerous when you've spent your life proving your value through availability. But psychology tells a different story. When access is no longer guaranteed, the mind starts paying attention. It replays interactions. It reassesses assumptions. It wonders. And curiosity, once triggered, is far more magnetic than reassurance. But here's the uncomfortable question. Why does withholding energy feel more respectful than giving it freely? The answer sits deep in how the human brain interprets value. We don't measure worth by effort alone, we measure it by selectivity. A man who gives everything to everyone communicates, without words, that his time has no hierarchy. And when nothing is prioritized, nothing feels special. This is why the most dangerous boundary to ignore is the one around your time. Time isn't just hours, it's proof of purpose. When you protect it, you're signaling that your life is already full, already meaningful, already moving somewhere. That signal creates attraction because it suggests you're not waiting to be chosen, you're choosing. But the real tension comes next, because what happens when someone pushes against that boundary, testing whether you really mean it? This is where most men break their own rules. The moment resistance appears, they over-explain. They soften. They negotiate against themselves. And in doing so, they reveal the truth they hope to hide, that the boundary was conditional. The brain notices this instantly. Conditional boundaries don't feel like boundaries, they feel like suggestions. And suggestions invite negotiation. A firm boundary, on the other hand, doesn't argue. It doesn't persuade. It simply exists. And when someone bumps into it, the reaction tells you everything you need to know about the future of that connection. Will they respect it? Or will they resent it? That reaction is the filter most men skip, and it costs them years. But there's an even deeper boundary almost no one talks about, because it lives inside, not outside. Emotional access. This is where things get dangerously quiet. Many men open their inner world far too early, believing vulnerability alone creates intimacy. But psychology is precise here. Intimacy grows from mutual investment, not unilateral exposure. When one person reveals everything while the other is still observing, the dynamic tilts. You stop being a mystery and start being a resource. And here's the bitter emotional peak most men don't want to hear. Being emotionally available without discernment doesn't make you deep, it makes you predictable. The mind craves discovery. When there's nothing left to uncover, connection plateaus. So the question becomes, how do you stay open without giving away the core of yourself too soon? The answer is pacing. A boundary isn't a wall, it's a gate. It opens slowly, in response to consistency, effort, and respect. When your emotional depth is revealed layer by layer, it creates a psychological pull. Each layer feels earned. Each moment of closeness carries significance. And when that pacing is ignored, something dangerous happens. The relationship becomes emotionally lopsided. One person is invested. The other is evaluating. And evaluations rarely favor the one who's already all in. But there's one final test that exposes everything, and it often arrives without warning. Distance. Pullback. Silence. When energy shifts, when replies slow, when warmth cools, this is where boundaries either save you or expose you. The instinct to chase is primal. The fear of loss kicks in. And most men respond by increasing effort, attention, reassurance. Psychologically, this backfires. Because effort given in response to withdrawal teaches the brain that distance is rewarded. The pattern locks in. The power shifts. But when you respect the space instead, when you remain grounded, unchanged, steady, you introduce uncertainty. And uncertainty forces clarity. Either she steps forward, or the connection reveals it was never stable to begin with. That's not loss. That's information. And here's the final truth that lands hardest. Boundaries don't make you less loving. They make your love credible. They tell the world that being close to you is a privilege, not a default. And when that message is sent early, clearly, and calmly, something remarkable happens. You're no longer trying to hold the relationship together. You're watching it meet you where you stand. And the question that lingers now, the one that should echo long after this video ends, is simple but unsettling. What kind of relationships would you attract if you stopped proving your worth, and started protecting it?